Okay, heading down into the engine room. This is a typical kind of setup you'd see in a, we're actually just under 50 feet long, but pretty much any boat in the, I'd say 35 to 50 foot size or thereabouts, you're going to have pretty much the two engines set up here with pretty much most of the same stuff. And we'll just pan around here one time to give you a quick look, and then we'll talk about some of it in detail. Here we've got a 8 kilowatt Westerbeek generator. Everything here is diesel, the generator and the two main engines. This set works really well for what we do. Plenty of power. Works very well, very dependable unit. I've known people that have these units and they're approaching 10,000 hours on them. And if you keep them maintained properly, they really do last forever, or almost forever. Typically on the generators, I mean, there's just a couple things. Basically, oil and filter changes, which most manufacturers on the engines or on the generators are going to tell you, once a season, or typically 100 hours. Most people think of an average season as 50 hours. We generally run about 100 hours, but the average is about 50, and most people are changing their oil and their filter, and if it's a gas engine, maybe a water separator filter once a season. Really, the only other thing you have to watch on the generators is the raw water impellers on the raw water pump. I'm not sure if I can get you in here to see it, but it's basically right under here. Basically, what you've got is that housing right there, and you can see the plate. It's been off a couple times, and the red paint's off of it. But that little plate comes off, and there's a rubber impeller in there, and that impeller is sucking the water out of the river or out of the sea, and it's cooling the secondary side of your cooling system. This particular generator and the engines have a primary cooling side, which is almost like your radiator on your car, except obviously there's no fan, there's no air cooling here. We're cooling with water. So this reservoir and the engine block itself has antifreeze in it, which runs through a heat exchanger, which is down below, which you can't really see from here. And one side is the coolant side from the primary side from the engine, and the other side of that heat exchanger is the raw water coming in from the sea, and it's cooling that heat exchanger, cooling the antifreeze, and then letting it go back into the engine and keeping the engine cool. So that little rubber impeller is what moves that water from the sea through the into the boat, through the heat exchanger, and back out again. And usually, especially if you're doing a lot of shallow running, and maybe you've got some silt and things like that are going in there and possibly messing up or grinding that rubber up, and you're going to burn that rubber up and burn that impeller out. Some people say once every 2 years they change their impellers. We end up being in a lot more shallow water in different anchorages and places like that. So we typically we'll try to change those every year or so. Plus, we put a lot of hours on our generator. I don't know if you can see here or not, but we're I think it's 1,411 hours on this generator. And it's got a pretty good setup for gauges. We've got water temperature, top left, oil pressure, top right, alternator charging voltage on the bottom left, and hour meter on the bottom right. Again, maybe just every couple seasons or something, run over the whole thing and just tighten up anything you can get to, any wrenches, any bolts, or I know some of they tell you to torque the heads, I can't remember what it is now, 750 hours, something like that, but check your manuals, and you're going to have things like that, other than the typical oil change and filter and impeller. That's really the biggest thing with these. Maybe check your belt on your alternator, and check your coolant fluid level and your oil level. But that's basically it. There's also a metal air filter on this that you can take out and hose and clean off, and that's really it. If you keep up with that, it just these things run forever and just give you an incredible service. The motors are these are Cummins diesels. They're the 5.9s, very similar to what you'd see in some of the Dodge trucks. Very dependable, a lot of fuel economy. We've been really happy with them. And again, these motors down here as well as up on the dash have a separate temperature and oil pressure gauge, which are mechanical, so they're not electric or anything, so they're a little more accurate. You can stick your head down here and see what kind of temperature you're running and what kind of oil pressure you're running, and see how that compares to your gauges on the dash. Just gives you kind of secondary check. Much like the generator on these engines, this right here is the raw water pump, much bigger than what we saw in the generator. In here is a rubber impeller that's doing the same thing. It's sucking the seawater in through a hole in the bottom of the boat, comes in through here, comes along this pipe, down through here, into this cooler, which is kind of hard to see too close, but and that's cooling intake air going into the turbocharger, and also again running through a heat exchanger on the other side of the engine, which I can show you on this engine. Heat exchanger here, which again is cooling all of your antifreeze in the engine, which resides in this reservoir right here and runs through the block. So again, it's what they call a freshwater cooled system, where the engine's got its primary cooling antifreeze in a closed loop in this reservoir in the engine block, and a secondary loop, which is the seawater coming into the seawater pump. And again, maintenance here is much the same. It's oil and filter changes, impeller every year to 2 years, depending on your use. Air filter. Obviously you can see when this turns from white to gray, and that's usually, we probably change those every couple of years, every couple hundred hours, something like that. And I think that's basically it for the just general maintenance. There's other things, obviously, you should check your manual that you're going to do over time. These coolers right here that cool the intake air that runs to the turbocharger here. They have dissimilar metals in them, and there's some different components in there. There's a tube bundle, again, where you have air running through one side and coolant running through the other, or raw water running through the other, that cools the air to get it cold before it goes into the turbocharger, before it gets thrown into the engine for combustion. So the cooler the air is, the more dense it is, and the better explosion you get, and the more power you get. So that tube bundle inside the cooler there, it's a different metal than the housing, and over time they're going to expand and contract differently as they heat and cool, and you're also going to get some corrosion in them because they are dissimilar. And so sometimes at the I would say maybe the 1,000 hour or 1,500 hour, you have to check your book. They need to come off. The tube bundles need to come out, clean everything, make sure there's no corrosion in there. And but that's probably a 1,000 hour, 1,500 hour deal, depending on where you run, whether you're in a lot of salt water or fresh water or what you're doing. But again, we're not going to get real into that stuff right now. Just check your manual and see what it tells you. See if I can get the best light on here. Then you've got your transmission. And what we see here is this is the transmission filter, and also the fill point. And I don't know if you can see it over here, but right down here is the transmission dipstick. So you're checking fluid on your transmission just like you are on your engine, and I like to check them every time we go out. I don't always do that, but it's a good practice just in case you you spring a leak in an oil line, or a filter's coming loose, or gosh knows what's going on. If you're looking at it if you're checking things that religiously, you're going to catch something when it happens and save yourself from a very expensive repair. Okay, also looking around the engine room here. Here you've got the marine exhaust. So we are exhausting out of here, going through our big black can here, which is a muffler, and up and out the back to an exhaust in the back there. Over here we have a 60 amp battery charger or converter. This is basically taking care of the 7 batteries we have on the boat. It's charging them when either the generator's running or when we're plugged into shore power. If we have the charger breaker turned on on the panel. We upgraded from the standard charger or converter on this system, on this boat, because we added a lot of 12-volt stuff that wasn't really stock, and so we want to be able to add batteries and make sure we're never going to have a 12-volt problem, and this has done really well for us. Additional breakers down here, over and above the breakers on the panel and inside, and these are breakers for things like bilge pumps. We have some main cabin breakers here, breakers for the electronics, breakers for sump pumps, aft bilge pumps, blowers, emergency pumps, oil change pump, those types of things. And we've also got our engine hour meters on this panel. If you can read that or not, but basically they're dead even at 725 hours. We got lucky when we found this. Had very low hours on it, so it's been a good boat for us. We have actually, if you notice, we've actually put this toolbox in here, which has pretty much every tool we need, and it's just a godsend. Everything's here. Whenever we're working, you just turn around. It's right there. You're not running out to get something from under the couch or out of the dock box. This is probably one of the best things we've done, is put this shelf in. Our batteries are right under there. We put the shelf over the batteries, installed the box here, and now all our tools are right here at arm's length whenever you're doing anything down here in the engine room. And it's a boat, so you're down here a lot doing different types of maintenance, so it really works out well. Just below that, we have this is the sea strainer for the air conditioning. So basically, let me get down here to show you. This right here is water coming up from the seacock on the bottom of the boat, the valve on the bottom of the boat that lets the water in. It's running through the strainer and back out to this pump, and then this pump is leaving this pump here, and it's running to the 2 air conditioning units in the boat that are cooling the air conditioning units. Or when we're in reverse cycle heat mode, they are bringing water to those units to pull out the latent heat from the water and create heat for us. Let's see. We've also got a fire protection CO2 system on this boat, so if some of our sensors down here pick up heat or smoke down here, these go off and will kill a fire for us automatically. Water spigot down here they put in for us, some 12-volt lighting. This is the other side, obviously, the other exhaust. Back here, back behind the generator, we've got the main seawater strainers for the engines. This is the starboard side, port side. Now, as you can see here, we've drilled the caps of these out, and you probably saw it on the air conditioning strainer too. And we added these little fittings in. Well, we can take the plug off of the top of that fitting, which is right here. Take this off, and a garden hose fits on here. We open this valve, start the engine up, and we run our antifreeze right through there. And that's how we winterize our engines, and we winterize them very, very quickly and very, very easily. Perco used to make these caps for these different types of strainers, but they don't anymore, so we've had to make them ourselves. I think you just heard the air conditioning pump kick off. And down here, fuel pump, bilge pump, another high water alarm, secondary bilge pump, pretty standard stuff. Over here is our septic tank for septic, and our vacuum flush evacuates into here, and then we pump out over the side at the marina at the pump out station. Let's see what else. This is a Raycor filter, which is basically a fuel filter that is just another fuel filter other than the one on the engine. It's got filter elements in it. They're very easy to change. Typically with diesels, you know, if you've got a running problem, you're not getting air to it or you're not getting fuel to it. Typically it's fuel. So if you've got some bad stuff in your fuel tank, whether it's dirt or water or nasty stuff, these are also water separators. These are a big help in keeping your fuel clean and properly maintained for the engines. This is the smaller one for the generator. I don't know if you can see the big one back there. That's one of the main engine Raycor filters and setups right there. And then on the back, the two big tanks you see there are the water tanks. She holds 100 gallons. Basically no maintenance there. And then right between them you can see the pump for the trim tabs, which sits right in there. So let's see what else. Down here, just a separate battery for the generator, standalone for the generator, so if you ever have your other batteries going down, you can always start your generator and in turn get your battery charger and converter started. Start it up and pump and juice to your main batteries, so you can ultimately get your 12-volt systems running again. So it's basically an isolated kind of backup system, if you will, that always prevents your generators from going down. And what else? Well, there's the Weber grill, which gets a lot of use. One of the most important pieces of equipment on the boat, obviously. That and the cooler. And I think that's basically the typical engine room that you're going to see out there. I think that's it.